thanks to everyone for joining us today. It's a exciting panel looking at innovating in legacy businesses and industries. And we have a very global panel today, and there they all are. Annalisa in from Zurich, I'm in New York, and I believe Vivek, you're in Singapore, are you not? Great. So exciting global panel. First, some quick thanks. This is, I think, our 14th CDX roundtable. Thanks to Dina and Jacob from Newlab for working with me to get this set up, and Sheila as well. My team, Kendall and Josh, who've been working behind the scenes here, and the rest of the Techonomy and CDX team, Caitlin and David Kirkpatrick out there. So we're gonna jump right in and just some quick opening remarks about CDX briefly. We've been covering digital transformation since 2003, mostly at in-person conferences, and we certainly hope that we can see you all again in an in-person conference, probably 2021. But if sooner and it's safe, then we'll do that. If not, then we look forward to seeing you all in person next year, but we've been doing these digital roundtables every Wednesday now. So I'm gonna do some very, very quick introductions. And if everybody, we can go around the horn here, and Vivek, we'll start with you, kind of name, rank, serial number, and then we'll get into more sort of detailed introductions with everybody in your roles. But Vivek, why don't we start with you, and welcome from Singapore.
Sure, thanks, thanks Drew, and hello to everyone. So I'm Vivek Salgaocar. I am in Singapore, where it's actually just after midnight. But I am awake and ready. So thanks, first of all, to you, Drew, CDX and Techonomy for having this panel. I'm director at the Vimson Group, which is a family-owned India-based conglomerate involved in a number of industries. But the one we're speaking about today specifically is mining iron ore specifically, which is at the end of the day a legacy industry. So we're not talking about mining cryptocurrency, we're talking about physical hard mining, which is what one of our primary businesses is.
That's great. So I will now go Dateline Zurich and Annalisa.
Hi, Drew. Thank you very much. I'm Annalisa Gigante. I've worked in innovation for over 25 years and led teams in different industries, including life sciences and chemicals. I was head of innovation and R&D in LafargeHolcim, that is the largest global cement producer, and I'm now a board member.
Great, thanks so much. And back across the Atlantic, New York, Satish.
Hey everyone, I'm Satish Rao. I'm Newlab's Chief Product Officer, and Newlab is a community of startups and entrepreneurs and forward-thinking innovators, and we support industry and civic partners in solving their large challenges through a platform we've developed called our studio model, and we'll talk more about that today.
That's great. And Satish, you're gonna do just a brief presentation here on Newlab, and the company, as well as sort of your innovation studio framework. For those of you not familiar with Newlab, they occupying a fantastic space over in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and we certainly hope to do an event over there in person at some point because it's absolutely fantastic. So I'll invite you to start your screen share here, Satish, and just give us a quick overview on Newlab and then how you're setting up these innovation studios and working with your corporate partners.
So Newlab, what we generally do is we support and build ecosystems of basically really forward-thinking innovators and apply that towards generally legacy industries. And the reason why these legacy industries are interesting to us is basically the types of technologies and sort of mindsets of entrepreneurs that we're interested in working with. And so when we talk about frontier tech, we mean robotics and biology and chemistry and sensors and advanced AI. And so the types of communities we don't necessarily work with are marketplace or sort of really smart business plays, which are really amazing businesses. It's just not a point of view that we've taken sort of in how we think we can create impact. And so by recruiting a community of sort of like-minded individuals when it comes to really leveraging frontier science and tech, what has attracted our industries like mining to come work with us and sort of develop something together. And so as an example of what we do, I'm going to talk about Prospect Mining Studio, which we launched in partnership with Vimson and Vivek. And so this is a nice kind of way of Vivek and I to come together and sort of talk about our collective vision and how we think we can apply this model we've developed together and apply it in mining. And so what we do at the Prospect Mining Studio is build an ecosystem of amazing startups and researchers and point that at challenges we think are apparent in mining to create the future state of mining. And so mining, as we all know, is an industry that's been around for generations. It's a highly heavy operational environment. You've got folks that have generations of knowledge that are extremely valuable. but sometimes it might take an outside lens to solve some of the kind of headwinds that are coming in the direction of mining. And so we look at this as a way of being an extension of what the mining industry needs to do or wants to do in their industry, by attracting teams that can build, pilot, and scale frontier tech and focus that on challenges that approach sustainability and social responsibility. We work with Vimson, and Vivek will give his own intro a bit on Vimson himself. But Vimson is one of the oldest iron ore mining companies based in Goa. And the fact, I think, that will come up in the discussion today is the fact that they've been family owned and are still family owned allows them to not just have a vision on how they want to be in the mining industry, but actually execute it. And so the Prospect Mining Studio was part of that strategy, and Vivek can speak more about that when he introduces himself. But generally, Vimson has operations across the entire mining value chain, working in exploration to processing to transportation of the minerals. And so they have a very long view on all the challenges across mining, not just sort of a specific area. So just by the numbers of Newlab, just to show the types of communities we can bring to bear to something like mining, our membership community is comprised of now 140 plus frontier tech startups. That's over 700 entrepreneurs total in that company, many of which reside at our location in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. So our location's an 84,000 square foot space, full of prototyping facilities, and originally a really great home for hardware companies, and still is, but has attracted a lot of software companies as well. So we're about 2/3 hardware, 1/3 software in terms of the breakdown of the community. Having that community together has created great results. We've had tremendous growth when it comes to total valuation of these companies, north of 2.8 billion. We've had acquisitions, some of which have been a result of collaborations with our community. And we're increasingly, every month doing more and more corporate engagements. Some are longer term, like with Vimson, when it comes to the mining studio. Some are a little more shorter term sprints. But generally speaking, we are increasing our sort of reach and sort of access to industries in ways that we can help them advance. So the Newlab platform, which is applied to prospect mining, is this idea of bringing in corporations, entrepreneurs, venture, and in some cases cities where relevant together to the table. And so we'll talk more about ecosystems later, but we feel we need these capabilities represented across the spectrum. It's not just about technology. It's not just about venture. It's not just about industry knowledge. It's about all of those things put together to really solve the problems. And this is what we do in our studio. So the Prospect Mining Studio is a phased approach, but we can kick off those phases depending on when we're working with our partner. It's typically roughly a 12-month program cycle, which I think is pretty key to point out. We're not trying to solve mining issues in 8 weeks or 6 weeks or 2 weeks. These things take time. And so how do you make sure you get a solution that can be vertically integrated into a mining operation? You have to understand the problem space, find the teams, and then build towards effective pilots. So with Vimson, I think we've come together on a patient approach in doing this, but it's still effective and it's still a form of acceleration, but understanding that the industry is a difficult one to solve all their challenges at once. So it is a 12-month program. This is the timeline we're following currently, where we had an open call for participants last fall. We had a great convening event when we could meet in person at Newlab, in our great space at Newlab, the summit, December 11th. 50 people from around the world came representing mining and academic researchers and startups. And it's really one of the events I think about when I remember the days where we used to we could convene, and that will come soon enough. But that summit was a great way of learning, what are the real problem spaces we should go after, and helped us recruit the right teams to build with, which was a great outcome of that summit. We're currently working with those teams, planning out pilot opportunities. We're in investment diligence with some of the teams as well. And certainly with COVID keeping us away from actual pilot spaces, we're sort of making as much progress as we can to have the pilot plans ready to go for when we can get into those sites. We'll be ready to go, and that's where we are today. And so what do we do? What's the actual mechanisms that we do in Prospect Mining Studio is the first thing is we define the challenges. So if a mining company says, well, I want to extract value from my tailings, well, what does that really mean? And so it's not just about sort of searching for teams that have the right keywords. It's digging in a bit with the partner first. And so we do a little bit of design thinking and consulting, but just enough to extract the knowledge that we need to be able to use that to recruit the right companies who represent the right capabilities. And so there is a little bit of strategy design that happens at the beginning in terms of defining the challenges. And then we bring people together. It's not just about bringing companies. We bring in people who might understand policy where that's relevant for mining. We bring in academics who are looking at the really the future state of things and what's possible, not necessarily just practical. And we bring all those thought leaders together in order to ideate on not just who we should identify from a capability perspective, but what are the types of projects we should pursue for the mining industry. That's a lot of the convening we do at Newlab, is in order to kind of get that thought together and apply that in the right way through the rest of the studio. We push companies to prototype rapidly, and we support that. So a lot of that is talking to Vimson and understanding what are the types of KPIs we need to really integrate this solution in a pilot. And then we bring that back to what the prototype should look like. And so it's very much acting as a really strong strategic thinker, project manager for these teams. And what you're doing is you're allowing the entrepreneurs to do what they do best, which is build and build towards an outcome that we sort of work really hard with them to lay out that roadmap. And finally, which I think is really a value that we will talk about more in this session, is the piloting. And so proof of concepts are one thing, we can demonstrate cool tech, but how do you do pilots where the outcomes lead to the partner who's hosting the pilot is integrating that solution. And so you're testing technical metrics, you're testing costs, you're testing usability, you're bringing in the right stakeholders that use the product. So this is not just demoing, this is how do you design a pilot the right way to really make it a compelling and almost like a necessary thing for the mining partner to integrate. And then how you do that feeds back into how you do the prototypes, which feeds back into how you convene, which feeds back into how you recruit companies. So this is the vision of the studio that we're applying in prospect mining. And ultimately, the long-term view is that we want to capitalize this growth. And so we want to invest in this. And so when we're bringing in teams and putting through this process and getting into pilots, we are validating deal flow essentially. And so this becomes a great investment opportunity for Vimson and Newlab and others who want to join. Finally, I'll just go briefly. We'll talk more about this in the hour, but we do cover the entire sort of range of the mining value chain. And so just listing the focus areas here, applications across the board. We started out wide. We might go more focused in this year too, but we felt really strongly that we want to start wide and kind of really understand all the problem sets across these different steps in the mining value chain and recruit all the companies we can to work with. And so our cohort currently today represents probably applications that could address each one of these applications in mining. And technologies across the board. And what point I'll make later is that half our cohort has never worked in mining before. And so these are venture-backed companies with products in market that are basically have created lily pads that could be applied to mining if given the right roadmap for the portal to do so. And that's what the Prospect Mining Studio can do, is find those great teams already thinking about mining, but even find awesome teams in ag or in manufacturing that develop something compelling that could be applied to mining. And so just the final snapshot of where we are now. We have a great knowledge of the industry and sort of the innovation that's out there that could be applied. We recruited over 70 teams to apply, had 50 come to the convening event in December. We have a host of great advisors, and we're currently working with 15 startups that are on our website for piloting and prototyping, and also some investment possibilities. And these are the teams.
Great. Fantastic. Great setup, and look forward to digging in on how this was sort of executed in the real world. And as you pull down your screen share, Satish, I also just have a quick follow-up question on that. And talk to us quickly just about the different verticals where you're building these different innovation studios. I mean, we're talking about mining today, but give us a sense of some of the other verticals that you're working.
Yeah, so the studio with Vimson was our first in a sort of a major industry, I would say. Before that, we were doing studios in city technologies, urban tech with New York City and government officials that funded that program. So how do you develop solutions that affect the communities in an urban environment? We've since then launched studios with Verizon in 5G and edge computing that's addressing areas in industrial automation, manufacturing, and energy. We recently announced a broad partnership with Ford and Michigan Central to launch 2 mobility studios in Detroit. So it'll be local hires there in Detroit. We run a studio in refugee and emergency housing. That's a social impact effort. We've got developing programs in ag tech and railroad and transportation. And so there's a theme there that's really about, legacy industry and also social impact, but it's about working with things that are going to be in our lives for forever, right? So how do you move things across transportation? How do you take things on the ground to serve our electronics needs, right, and so on? Right.
That's great. Look, I look forward to getting over to the Navy Yard, hopefully in 2021, and doing something over there. So I want to transition here to the group discussion. Annalisa, you're going to help me lead this, and I'll let you take it away. But before you sort of jump in and lead, I just have a quick question for you. You have a tremendous amount of experience in sort of setting up, managing innovation across large companies, legacy companies. Can I get from you, just based on your sort of, cumulative experience and get your sage advice in terms of setting up a framework in terms of managing innovation, particularly at a legacy company where maybe they're just embarking on that. They don't exactly know what to do. Talk to us about the framework that you set up to push an innovation sort of initiative or a digital transformation initiative to get that boat off the pier.
Thank you, Drew. Some of it, I think, is basically mindset. It's not because you're in a legacy industry that you can't do any innovation. Actually, the scope is huge. You know, you can apply all sorts of new technology to solving current problems for customers. And then there's an understanding that innovation really is a discipline. So you need to have people who understand how to live in that gray area and how to build those bridges and those collaborations in order to make things happen. And thirdly, you can't just have an innovation team working on their own. You have to engage the countries, people who work with customers, directly with customers, and build that collection of initiatives inside the company, because it's the combination of these things that makes innovation actually work and happen at pace.
Right, that's great. And quickly as a follow-up, in this sort of new normal of the last 6 months, the companies that you've been working with, what have you learned in terms of continuing to drive these innovation efforts forward as everybody is virtual and remote? Has a best practice or two sort of emerged? Has it been helping? Has it been hurting? And what have you helped your clients and the people you work with implement to help continue to drive these innovation initiatives forward in this new normal?
So half of the things have become a little easier. You can get hold of people. It doesn't matter where they are. You know, you can discuss things on video. You can show. So those things have happened in an easier way. On the other hand, access to labs has been not necessarily that easy, and not the same all over the world. So that's been a bit of a headache to try and get lab time, lab space, and be able to get the teams together, because sometimes you really do have to do things in real life.
Right, exactly. Well, that's great. Well, I'm thrilled that you are sort of co-moderating this with me, and I'm going to let you take it from here a little bit. And just everybody out there, if you could put your questions into the chat string, we will all be monitoring the chat string and can see those. We may answer those in real time. But Annalisa, I'll let you introduce Vivek more formally here, get into a little bit about the mining business and give us some scope about that. And then let's dig into the mining studio and this great case study.
Super. Vivek, I just wanted to ask you for an overview of the industry. Not all of us have worked in mining, and also the place that innovation has in the mining industry historically.
Sure, thanks, Annalisa. So mining is an industry, as you know, as was mentioned before, that has truly been around for a very, very long time. And it will be around for a very, very long time. So the thing is, you know, it is a legacy industry. I don't necessarily see that term as a disadvantage, right? Because when you say, okay, innovation in a legacy industry, oftentimes that is implying a certain kind of inertia, which is going to make it difficult to innovate. And I'll get to that in a second. But mining as an industry, so mining, to say mining as an industry is kind of like saying tech as an industry, right? Within that, you have all sorts, whether it's ag tech, health tech, right? If there's deep tech, there's so many different things. Similarly with mining, right? If you're mining iron ore versus copper versus gold versus whatever it is, they're very, very different industries, all very, very large in their scale, and all that have been in existence for a long, long time. Now, what that means is that, so I mean, to put some numbers to it, it's well over $1 trillion annually in terms of, you know, in terms of revenues, if you look across the board. And that's something that is going to continue, because at the end of the day, no matter what it is that we do, you can't get away from the fact that you need materials to build whatever it is that you want to build, right? Whether it's building roads, railway tracks, or if you want quantum computing, you need a compound called, a mineral called niobium, for example, right? Which is what you need to conduct at certain temperatures, etc. So it's something that is all around us, and yet it's something that is in many ways opaque, right? And that's primarily because the barriers to entry are very high. So the players that are actually in it are relatively few, and for someone new to get in is increasingly difficult. If you look at, so from our point of view, we have been in it since the early 50s. So we're a family, you know, we're a family company. I'm the third generation in it. It started by my grandfather. My father is now chairman of the company, and I've been in it. So from our point of view, it's, getting back to this sort of legacy, right? So it's a legacy industry and we're a family business. And both of those are often looked at as sort of, in a negative way often when it comes to innovation, because they're supposed to be slow moving. I see it a little bit differently, because I think because they're slow moving, there actually is, much more of an opportunity there, right? And we can get into that later on, but my point here is that it is a massive industry, both in terms of scale, in terms of geographic span, as well as, in terms of just time, right? And it's going to be there, which is why I think the opportunity is tremendous, and that is what we are trying to take advantage of. And I'm happy to get into that as well.
And as an early innovator in the industry, does Vimson Group have a vision of what disrupting mining looks like? And how did this get you to then collaborate with Newlab and start the Prospect Mining Studio?
Sure. So this is kind of one of the points where I say being in a legacy industry and being in a family actually is an advantage. And what I mean by that is we don't have the luxury of being able to think in terms of quarters or even years. We have to think in terms of generations. So I'm the third generation in. I would hate to be the last generation, right? So I need to make sure that there are several generations after me. And so I need to make sure that our company and by association, our industry is future-proof in many ways. And that's essentially how this whole concept came about. So when we say, how do we look at it? How do we look at innovation? I think innovation is a necessity for longevity. And that's, at the end of the day, what it is that we need, because it is a legacy industry. We want to continue for it to be a legacy industry and, for the family, for the industry, and what have you. Now, how it came about was, so initially when we were looking at it, I first was looking at it as potentially having something in-house, whether it's, a corporate venture capital or if it's an innovation team, in-house, but quickly realized, just from conversations as well as from looking at precedents that have been set, that at the end of the day, if you are a legacy industry, no matter how much new talent you bring in, no matter how dynamic you are going to have the DNA of a legacy industry, of a legacy company, right? And so at the end of the day, you are going to think the way a mining company thinks, right? And that's where we said, okay, fine, let's try to see how we can do it differently. And that's how this, we were thinking of, okay, how do we look at a joint venture model, right? And it was kind of by chance. So a common friend introduced me to Scott Cohen, who's one of the co-founders of Newlab. And, we would, just as, two people to meet who might have something interesting to talk about. And we were just exchanging ideas as to what we were working on. And I said, look, this is something that I've been thinking about, etc. And Scott's an interesting guy. Straight away he said, all right, let's try to figure out, we've done similar stuff like this. Let's talk and see what possibilities are. And that conversation, carried on over the next couple of months until finally they came to a point where he said, hey, this is super interesting. Why don't we do this together? And that's kind of where, this whole model really was born. And I think what makes it different and to my mind, what I think sets it up for success is the fact that Newlab essentially knows nothing about mining and Vimson essentially knows nothing about early stage technology, right? So both of us don't really know anything about each other's worlds relative to, what the company's domain knowledge is. And that's the beauty of it. So, and as Satish said, half of the company has never had mining experience before, right? So what we have in-house, what we have as a group that's been around, for several decades in mining, we have a strong team of PhDs, geologists, mining engineers, surveyors, what have you, right? So we have a whole lot of mining experience and operational experience, and that helps when you combine it with what Newlab has, which is experience in early stage technology. So there has to be that product market fit at the end of the day, because otherwise it's a bit pointless, right? And so there is that. What helps is we have the ability to validate technology, and similarly, Newlab has the ability to suggest technologies that we would never even come across or think of, right? So to give you an example, the sort of defining part of this whole structure is essentially breaking down the mining process into simple building blocks, right? And what that does is for someone who has no experience or no real knowledge in mining to say, hey, why don't you look at this technology for that specific function, right? And that's kind of what we're trying to do, where we can see that there is technology that is very, very, very well established in many other industries that just has never even thought of mining, right? Simple things like computer vision, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of how it came about.
All right, this is a good place to bring in Satish. So from your end, then what are the difficulties in working with startups and getting to pilots as quickly as possible?
Yeah, I think that's it's exactly how Vivek described what you know and what you don't know. And so for startups, imagine two founders coming out in the world and deciding to start a company that's a great synthetic biology platform. What do I do in mining with that? How do I find the Vimson that's willing to talk to me and speak with me and share that knowledge so I can build the product in the way it needs to be? And so we train startups to talk and do to customer discovery and get out there and talk to 100 customers in mining. That's really hard to do. And even if you do get those answers, as Vivek is explaining, it becomes more complex as you start to build. And so the challenge we find is how do you translate this knowledge that the Vimsons of the world has to the startups who are developing this great emerging tech? And that's exactly what we try to solve here.
And how do you go about finding these startups? Where do you find them? What are you looking for? What are the goals when you're trying to put that ecosystem together?
Yeah, there's a lot of art and a little bit of science involved in that. I think Vivek can attest to that. I think it's a lot of, we certainly try to look outside of the mining industry a bit, and we believe we have strong networks to do that. So we have a strong portfolio of investors and venture capital firms that have portfolio of companies in emerging tech. We go through our own networks within the North America, for example, and also networks that Vimson may have globally. So finding the teams we want to find is one thing, but the types of teams we look for are really ones that love to solve these really meaty kind of complex problems. And it's surprising. I mean, for someone who might say, well, why would someone be even interested in we've had mining companies tell us, are our problems boring? We think our problems are boring. It's not worth advertising. Not the case. If you have an engineer that's building a great product, they would love to solve this mining problem. They think it's one of the grandest challenges in the world. They just need the opportunity. And so we really want to try to find those folks that have that vision, but are willing to get sort of in the weeds of the problem space with us, and really are developing frontier tech. The technology itself, we believe, has to be the moat that they're developing, and the rest of that we can help them with.
And Vivek,
sorry, go ahead. So I was going to say, just to add to what Satish was saying, this is, as I said, mining is an industry that spans many, many different minerals. We happen to mine iron ore, but there's one of the main things that we want, out of Prospect is for it not to really be about any one particular mineral or any one company, right? So it's very much there to be a platform for the mining industry across the board, right? And so apart from looking at all the places that Satish mentioned, we also, of course, within mining have networks within, academic institutions that are looking at mining have networks. But we also, I think what's very important is we also have networks amongst other mining companies, because at the end of the day, mining companies are the ones who are going to either make it, make it happen or not. And that's an important piece of the whole thing. And so we kind of bring together the entire, the entire group. And also I think what's different is the fact that we are looking at it from a very early point of, from an early stage point of view. So there is an ability to actually adapt to specific problems. So it's not just, having tech that's then far too advanced to really be applicable, but having, base tech that can actually then very well be adapted as a solution to a very specific problem.
Annalisa, before you jump into the conversation about ecosystem development, Satish, just a quick question for you based on what you were just mentioning. How are you sourcing the startups that, you're ultimately introducing to your corporate partners, and how has that changed sort of in this new normal? And, obviously you've probably been getting out and meeting startups regardless of the vertical at different events, and you bring them in to the facility there, but how are you sourcing startups to find really qualified, great startups for your corporate partners? And how has that sourcing process changed sort of in this new normal for you? Thanks.
Yeah, so I think our the way we look at it differently is that when we're generating those insights from the client first, from the partner, like a Vimson or other folks in the mining industry, what we're doing is we break down those problem sets into sort of atomic units, and then understand the types of capabilities you need to answer those problem sets, right? So if it's really about extracting value from tailings waste, and that's a biology problem, then let's find the biologists, but let's not worry so much about whether they've worked in mining before.
Right.
So we look at these startups as capabilities, and that's how we inform our search.
Yeah.
So then as we get out there, it's definitely through our networks. We look at accelerator programs around the world. We think we're a great platform and collaborate with accelerator programs. We're kind of spinning these companies out. And then in terms of how it's changed in COVID, it's certainly been a challenge, but there's lots of frontier tech startups out there still working hard,
Right.
still trying to make their businesses happen in 2020. And so now more than ever, we're actually generating a lot of interest in participating in our programs.
That's great. And I like the term frontier tech. That's great. Annalisa.
Well, so in my experience, innovation really happens in the border between disciplines. So part of the work of actually getting this together is getting people to collaborate that come from completely different technologies, backgrounds, sizes of businesses. And so I wanted to ask Vivek, do you have best practices in how you build that ecosystem, how you develop it, how you encourage collaboration? Have you found some great tools to help you, for example?
So that's an interesting question, and honestly, the thing is, in terms of it is part art and it is part science. So I think in terms of looking at how best, in terms of best practices, I think the most important thing is really to have regular communication with the industry experts and and the startups, because at the end of the day, they need to be developing solutions that are actually interesting for the industry. And that's really, I don't have a very kind of fancy framework for you there. It's essentially just regular interactions, which is why we try to keep it small. We don't want to, we know what our bandwidth is. We don't want it to be 100 companies that we're looking at, because at the end of the day, it is very bespoke. And so that's kind of, I think, what makes it, because it is something, we're not looking to kind of disrupt the entire mining industry, right? It's too big an industry to disrupt or, overnight, but there are many moving parts that we can actually look to improving. However, that takes time, and that's something that we're very, very aware of. And so what that means is it just means that there's a lot of hand-holding, there's a lot of interaction, and I think that is what ultimately works best.
And fast forward a little bit with this program with Prospect Mining.
Sure.
When there is a solution that you think would be great to then implement at scale, what would that look like from your end? How are you thinking of integrating it or not back into your company?
Sure. So, what we have the ability to do is, given our operations, we can actually use, we can actually take these startups and actually pilot them and test them out at our sites. Once we actually are able to do that and we see the benefit, I think it's a no-brainer, right? Because we definitely would either be a customer or look at acquiring these companies. And once these companies then have pilot data and they have been able to prove at scale commercially that this actually works, it's then a very easy sell to any other mining company. Because right now, one of the biggest problems is that mining companies are not going to take on a startup unless they have data, right? So it's a chicken and the egg problem, right? If they're not going to take them unless they have data, but how they're going to get that data in the first place, which is kind of the bridge that we're looking to build here. And so looking down, a few years down the line, where do I see this kind of going is to have this as a continuous process. This is definitely not something that is 6 months or 12 months. This is something that we have committed to underwriting and putting our money where our mouth is for several years, because we truly believe in it. And so, several years down the line, what we are hoping for is basically this becoming essentially a clearinghouse for solutions and problems, right? Where mining companies can say, hey, this is something that we need help with. Can you find early stage companies to help us? And hopefully we're able, to have that pipeline, either of companies that are already doing it or companies that we think can do it. And then we can move in that fashion.
And you can provide a piloting part to that. Sorry, Satish.
Yeah, so on the iron ore side of things, yes, we would. But as I said, there are other minerals, and we do have industry partners who mine other minerals as well, who are willing to take on partners. So depending on what it is, there is an ability to pilot. I think that's one of the biggest pain points that we're looking to solve.
And I think that's the area of collaboration too, Vivek, is the idea of bringing in other partners to pilot, because as Vivek said, is there are technology and solutions out there that are applicable to across mining. It doesn't matter what the mineral is. And there are certain ones that are certainly specific to gold versus silver versus iron ore. And so collaboration, I think, will come out when when the pilots get going. We have companies that are working in gold that could be easily applied to iron ore, for example. It's a great point of collaboration between two mining companies.
And just real quickly on that, in terms of that collaboration and sharing and partnering, is that financial as well, that those partners could come in, and if there is some financial, needs to get a pilot going, that they'll contribute to that as well?
Totally, yeah. We're working with different financial models on supporting, basically it's all about supporting the startup to deliver the pilot. That's what it comes down to. And so we need to find the pathway to do that, not just support them in doing the pilot itself, but how do you capitalize if they do have a successful pilot? We want that company to be able to deliver the product. And so does that capitalization come in the form of investment or further sponsorship? And that's what we do in partnership with the mining companies we're speaking with.
Great.
And Satish, one of the difficulties of working with very many startups is the due diligence moment. So both on the investment side that you just talked to and on the technology side, do you have some good tips to share about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's another art versus science. We're not trying to be cagey here. I think it's really true. I think one thing, we talk about frontier tech a lot, but we certainly want businesses and we want viable businesses. So we do look at these with an investment lens as well. And I think an investment lens feeds into the technology to some degree, because you can have great tech, but is it a great product? Is it something that addresses costs and efficiencies and usability and things like that? Can it scale at the massive scale of a mining company operates in? And some of these things are technical diligence, but some of these are also based on understanding the business itself. And so we do both in parallel, actually, as part of our filtration process. And so what that does is a few things. One, we think we've got very qualified startups that can work in pilots, but we also have an opportunity to create deal flow that way. And so as an investor, you can invest in these things as well. So it's not just, it is a clearinghouse, as Vivek mentioned, but it also serves multiple stakeholders, the output.
And with your background in academia and technology transfer there, how do you think we can improve getting new technologies to market? So that collaboration between universities, entrepreneurs, and industry.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I certainly did that for several years myself. I feel like what we're doing in the Prospect Mining Studio and our studios in general is we are creating a platform for early stage companies and later stage companies to get into mining more quickly. And so where we can turn that knob a little bit more is try to kind of reach down even earlier stage. I think the missing gap for universities are founders. I think we need compelling founders that can take that IP and spin it out. It can be a burden to expect a professor or the PhD student to be the founder of a company as well. You're basically asking them to do a career change in flight, which can happen and can be great. But to me, a pool of founders willing to work with that IP is where this should start in building that bridge.
And Vivek, do you have a call to action for the mining industry? For example, are there specific areas where you think innovation is really needed, whether it's on sustainability or, how mining works in society overall, on health and safety, for example? Are there things that are really top of mind for you?
Sure. I think, it's interesting you asked that question, because it's, at the end of the day, I think the only way for an industry such as mining, which hasn't really changed much, to actually be more profitable is to actually do things like be more energy efficient, or have lower of a health cost in terms of, health, by improving safety, you reduce your liabilities, by looking at better ways to extract. So, looking at biology, for example, rather than, traditional ways. So these are all, at the end of the day, these are ways that will directly contribute to the bottom line. But what they also do is reduce the footprint and are actually sustainable and are actually socially and environmentally responsible, right? So I think in terms of the call to action, I think it's this understanding that looking at sustainability and responsibility is actually something that directly contributes to the bottom line, and it's not just something that is just tossed around there because it's the it's the buzzword of the day, but it is actually, at the end of the day, what is going to move the needle in terms of profitability, and that is what finally drives decisions at the end of the day, whether we like it or not.
And Satish, now that you've had a view of what mining looks like, with your point of view, what would you ask the mining industry to work on? Yeah,
I was going to jump right in there. So I agree with Vivek 100%. And then in terms of how to reach out and sort of take action there is, I think, open the doors. The access to sampling, access to data, access to the knowledge. Basically, these things can be beacons to attract really great innovators to come try and solve your problems in the mining industry. But there needs to be some level of access, and it can be done in a safe and sort of anonymous or kind of protective way. But getting samples in the hands of a chemist, getting data in the hands of an AI engineer, these things can really go a long way in prototyping, developing compelling pilots.
That's great. I'd like to get to one quick audience question here, and it's going to be a little bit of a two-part sort of moonshot question, but I'm going to then bring it back down to asking you guys about an innovation that has actually emerged from this partnership. But Alexander Bergfield asks, and thanks Alexander for the question. When looking at the mining industry, you can see that main innovations happen in two areas: processes and equipment, and general tech innovation, and he lists some things there. And then he asks a question about SpaceX and you know, where is the mining industry going to go, and could space mining become a thing? So that's the fun moonshot question. But before you answer that, and maybe you can lead to the moonshot of where things are going in that sort of moonshot context, can you guys share just an innovation that has emerged from this partnership, actually sort of whether it's in the mines or as you're trucking the iron ore out, or using IoT and communication platforms to, you know, either measure, you know, how much has been mined? You know, I'm speaking ignorantly now, but talk to us about an innovation that has emerged, and then, you know, where might all this go? Are we going to be mining on Mars in our lifetime?
So, so you know, to take the moonshot question, I think we will. I don't think I'm going to be alive, you know, right, to see that. Primarily because there's enough to mine on the planet that we're on, you know, so we don't really need to go to asteroids or other planets. So that's, you know, it sounds great. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. As for innovations that have, or, you know, technologies that have come as a result of this, you know, there's a few of them. If you look at, you know, all the companies that we have, they are all doing amazing things within the industry. So, you know, specifically, you know, just off the top of my head, you know, one, for example, is this company called Salgaocar, which essentially does cyanide testing. So when you're mining gold, essentially you need to use cyanide, and cyanide is literally poison. And what they are able to do is essentially figure out a way to do it in a more sustainable and a cheaper way. So again, you're saving costs, but it is sustainable, and so you have that double win. And Satish, if you want to add any more, I'm sure you have a lot more to say about the other stuff as well.
Yeah, and Salgaocar, by the way, Annalisa is based in Switzerland, and that technology came out of University Lab, but they found a founder to take that out. So that's an example of where a team is built around a great IP to create the outcome that we're talking about today.
That's great. A quick follow up, and then Annalisa, I'll have you take it over again. You know, Techonomy, which is my parent company, and it's been great being part of the Techonomy family. They talk about a lot technology's impact on global society and business, and certainly the SDGs are very important to the Techonomy community as well to mine. So, you know, are you working with startups? Are there initiatives out there? Is there a priority in terms of, you know, quote unquote, being more green and looking at the environment and looking at innovations and startups that can help the industry overall, you know, as we all factor in the sustainable development goals and being more green and climate friendly?
So, you know, we're not specifically saying, okay, fine, you know, goal number 3 or goal number 4 right, is what we're looking at. But by default, as I said, all these companies are going to, at the end of the day, be sustainable, or help mining companies be sustainable, because that's essentially the only way that you're going to cut costs and that you're actually going to make. So, you know, so to answer your question, yes, we are, but we're not explicitly saying that. And what's interesting also is that, you know, if you oftentimes when you lead with that, it tends to kind of overpower the conversation, and it tends to mask the core of the company or the technology, which is not what we want to do. Because at the end of the day, we know that the technology is what is driving this, and by the way, it is also sustainable. So that's kind of how we look at it. But absolutely, that is, you know, front and center when we look at all of the companies.
That's great. And just Annalisa, we have about 4 or 5 minutes left, so I'll let you ask a last question here, and maybe we can even try to incorporate one more audience question.
Great. Well, I wanted to bring in an audience question, and it was on culture, which, you know, we're having a worldwide conversation right now, and I think it's a really important point. So on the one hand, you have frontier tech happening in New York City, and on the other hand, you have mines that are all over the world, many in developing markets. How do you translate the work between the various regions, and particularly with the intercultural issues that we all have to work with?
I think that's actually a tremendous strength that we have. The fact that we have this truly global collaboration. So to give you an example, we have weekly calls. I'm in Singapore. Our CTO is in Goa. Our senior advisor is in Berlin. Satish is in New York. And we have another associate from Newlab, Sheila, who's in San Francisco. So we literally span the globe, right? And what that does is you get perspectives across the board in terms of technology, and that actually makes it much more interesting as a value proposition to mining companies as well. Because if it's just mining focused technologies, the chances are they've already seen it and they've either said yes or no, and that's the end of that. What makes this different is that you have people from around the world, you have people from different industries that can actually provide solutions, which if you were just very kind of focused and narrow in your outlook, you wouldn't see that. So it's actually a strength rather than a challenge.
Yeah, I would second that. It's exciting. All of our Newlab studios are virtual, and no more than the prospect is incredibly a global program. As long as your partners are willing to take night calls in Singapore, and I get up at 6 a.m. to do calls with Australia, that's really the only challenge. It's been exhilarating, to be honest. And there are innovators everywhere. And so I think when you can look outside of your backyard, we look outside of New York all the time. That's the first question people ask us. Are you just looking in New York? Absolutely not. Even though New York is a great sort of center of gravity there. And you can see in our cohort, the team is from all over the place, and our applicants from all over the world as well. So cultural, I think it's been a benefit just being able to engage with people in Europe and Australia and India and Singapore. It's been an added value to the studio.
That's great. So I'm going to start to wrap things up here. I know David Kirkpatrick, who's the founder and editor-in-chief of Techonomy, has a quick question. So I think we're going to bring him in, and we're going to add Rhinebeck, New York to our global session here. David, I'll let you ask your question.
Thanks, Drew. Actually, I didn't really have a question just since I guess we have a couple more minutes, so we do have time to continue. But I was just going to say how great this discussion is. I think the specificity of this this partnership and the fact that it's mining is just so unexpected. I think all three of you have said really interesting things. I did have a question that I sent to you, Drew, and now I forgot. You sort of surprised me with this. Oh, I know what it was. I did want to know, since there seems to be time, Vimson, in Vimson, Vivek, do you expect this to become like a new business line in effect? Are you sort of hoping to develop like a services offering that might emerge from this, since you're talking about a lot of industries in which you do not directly participate currently? Or do you think Vimson itself might somehow expand into other industries, even in extractive terms, because of the work you're doing here?
Great question. Thanks, David.
So yes, and kind of what I mean by that is that, so to the second part of your question, yes, we are looking at, as a group, we are looking at investing in other forms of mining and other minerals as well. And, how that then adapts and takes on companies remains to be seen. But absolutely, we do see this as a potential business in and of itself. Particularly because nothing really like it exists. And, as I was saying initially, when you say legacy industry, that's used almost as a negative because of that inertia. But I think what that means is that the opportunity is tremendous because nothing's been done for so long, right? And so there could be 5 other people that do the exact same thing, and all 6 of us could actually win. So the opportunity is tremendous given the size and scale of the companies and the industry. And so absolutely, I think that there's a huge opportunity there as a business.
And also, let's face it, there's no industry sector probably that has a worse image than the extractive sector in general. And clearly you are a visionary within it, and I admire that. But if you can move that industry in a more sustainable direction, more power to you.
Well, I think I said this at the beginning too. These are industries that are going to be part of our lives forever. We're going to need metal for our electronics and our computers. We're going to have to grow food off the ground. We're going to have to transport things across rail and air. And so we're all motivated and incentivized properly to advance and transform these industries for the better, which will also affect their bottom lines.
I don't mean to be, Annalisa, you're a great moderator, and Drew and I've already been chatting. We want to get you involved in other things in the future because you're so good. But here's one final question for me. Money. Obviously, this is a costly project. Was the way that it got started, if you would candidly at least address some part of this, did Vimson basically put up a pretty big chunk of cash in order to make this possible? Is that what starts something like this to happen?
Yeah, so the thing is, at the end of the day, talk will only get you so far. You have to put your money where your mouth is, and you have to have that commitment. And we do have that commitment, and we're not just saying that. We actually have committed to funding it for several years, not just a one-time thing. It's not a 6-month thing. It's not a 12-month thing. This is a continuous thing that we want to have move forward. Now, what that also means, is the more partners we have, the bigger in scale that we can get it, right? However, we absolutely are committing a significant portion of capital to the running of the studio and to making it a success in every way we can.
Which has been an incredible benefit when speaking to other partners, that you have a mining company here putting skin in the game. They're supporting this program for the long term. And so when we go ask others to join, that's one of the first things we point out, which is very compelling and interesting to them.
That's
really cool.
That's great. No, thank you, David. So I'm going to wrap up and do a couple different things here and give you all a chance to think about my final question for all of you. And then, but I'm going to ask Vivek a quick industry question as I do that. The question I'm going to ask all of you at the end is, 30 seconds or less, what is your one piece of advice in terms of, creating a innovative culture? I know we've talked a little bit about it today, but just your one, if you could say one thing and one bit of advice, how do you create an innovative culture throughout your company, particularly a legacy company? I'd love to hear it. Vivek, before we go to that, just in the middle of conversation, just being the old analyst, we had talked about peak oil. We've been talking about peak oil for years now. And I'll ask a related question to the Newlab relationship. So is there a concern or is there a conventional wisdom that we are getting near peak resources as it relates to iron, or as it relates to gold, or as it relates to the different things that are quote unquote mined in this country? And the related question is, so therefore, are you working with Newlab? Is it to help you discover more of these resources out there and using technology to do that? Or is it about either being more efficient and things like that? So the first question is, are we at peak, sort of minerals or anywhere near that, just generally? And then, at a broad macro level, how are you working with Newlab, whether it's, using tech to find more of those resources or become more efficient as a company or something else?
Sure. So, as time goes by, we are getting closer to it. However, I don't think we're anywhere close to it, if that answers your question. Because there's a lot to be built, and there's a long way to go, because, you can't, I don't think you can go by the developed world, because there are massive, swaths of this planet that actually do need to develop. And for that, you need minerals at the end of the day, right? And there's only so much that you can recycle, and there's only so much that you can use. In terms of, so therefore, what we are looking for is really ways to improve the efficiency of current operations, and that spans everything that we have talked about.
That's great. And I'll start with you on the question to everybody, then Satish, and then Annalisa, I'll give you the last word. Vivek, what's your one piece of advice in terms of getting, whether it's buy-in across the company, creating a great innovative culture that's really going to stick?
I think the main thing is it has to come, at least from our point of view, we have the luxury of having it come from the top down. And then the other thing is also being able to find a couple of kind of, early adapters within the company, and also finding, I think, a valuable partner outside the company to actually then be able to put things together and actually have results come to fruition.
That's great. Satish.
Yeah, I think partnerships internally and externally, that's the key word. And partnerships are hard and it takes work. And I think embracing and understanding you need someone else to really work with is the way to create results. For me, for the industries like mining, we really appreciate engaging with the operators, the folks that you're building this technology for as the users, and getting their input into what they need. And so BD and investors are great. They have a great knowledge of the industry in general, but let's talk to the mining operators on the ground. And so when we can have that kind of cross-department knowledge within an organization, that's when Newlab can really figure out value. And that's what we do in prospect mining quite often.
That's great. Annalisa, I'm going to give you the last word.
Well, for me, great innovation is a combination of two things. One is being very curious and open-minded and learning as much as possible. And the other part is understanding the problem you're trying to solve as precisely as you possibly can, and being really single-minded about solving that problem.
I think that's great. And, we've focused on open innovation at CDX in the last 18 months. So we talked to a lot of people running studios and labs. And the one thing that I will say, as you're building an innovation team, or if you're looking for those champions, or you're looking for people to participate or work in a lab, find the people that are curious. Find the people that, if you're not curious, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. All right. So this is CDX's first tri-continent Roundtable. So Vivek from Singapore, thank you. Annalisa from Zurich, thank you. Satish from near me, I'm sure, here in New York.
Yep.
Thank you. And thanks for everybody for staying the full hour. We're right at 1 o'clock Eastern. We'll send a thank you email tomorrow, Ethical AI with Techonomy's Roundtable. Go to techonomy.com. You can get all the details on that. And we'll see you next Wednesday at the next CDX Roundtable as well. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.